This is your AP Government video on types of polls. Now, we talked about how public opinion can be measured through polling, and that is just one thing that it's used for. It's also used for benchmarking or tracking how good a candidate is doing. A lot of times in elections, this is done on voting day in something called entrance or exit polls. These are unscientific. All this means is that a polling firm puts a pollster outside of an in person polling place. And then as people go in or out of the polls, they ask them who they're either going to vote for or who they did vote for. They just make a tally on their sheet, and then they call in these results from various places around the country. And then the news media kind of use this as a predictor of who they think is going to win the election that night. Part of the problem is these are unscientific. People can lie to the pollsters. Various people like to vote in person, and in the rise of voting by mail, a lot of people don't even go to the live polling place in order to do this, so they're typically missing a significant portion of voter turnout. Scientific polls are often referred to as straw polls. These are informal, like an entrance or exit poll, and this is what the media most widely uses on election night, which is why if you're watching election night coverage or even in the couple of days prior, if you're looking at a piece of news and they're telling you what's likely to happen in the next election, why that can be off. A lot of times you'll see a local news agency just, go to the state fair and ask people walking by who they want to vote for. A scientific poll typically has to be a random sample, and that means that everybody who is part of the population that you're trying to poll should have a equal opportunity of being selected for that poll. So if you're trying to measure Arizona voters, then everybody who is an Arizona voter should have an equal chance of being selected to answer your questions. Second, there has to be a certain number. So if you're trying to do a scientific poll on Arizona voters and you have figured out that there are, 2 million voters in Arizona, then there's a certain number that you would have to hit in order for your polling sample to be the right size. Obviously, we don't have the time and money to ask every single voter who they're going to vote for. Otherwise, our polling would be perfect. So instead, you poll a certain percentage of that group, and the closer you are, the more people that are in your sample, the closer it is to the correct answer. And then, of course, there should be a margin of error. So once you do the statistics, a smaller margin of error is always better. And typically you need a margin of error of 3 points, plus or minus 3 points or lower, in order for it to be considered scientific. If your margin of error is still higher than 3, then you need to add people to your polling sample in order for it to be closer to correct. And what the margin of error means is that, let's say it says a certain elected official is 48% of the vote currently, a margin of error of 3% means it could be 3 points higher or 3 points lower than that. Now, there's obviously problems with polls. In many of the past presidential elections, which have the most media coverage, we've certainly seen issues with polls being wrong or the margin of error being too high. The margin of error, oftentimes on straw polls or unscientific polls, can be extremely high. To reduce that, you want to add more respondents to the sample population you're studying. You also see question bias when pollsters call you and ask you a series of questions. Sometimes they ask you leading questions, and that is something that would tell me that this is not truly a scientific poll where they're trying to see who I'm going to vote for. They're actually trying to give me false information about a candidate or get me to like their candidate better. For example, they could say something like, so-and-so candidate is running for office. How likely are you to vote for them? And you can say yes or no. And then the next question will be, hey, did you know that they cheated on their spouse and did all these terrible things? Now are you more likely to vote for them? That type of question bias is meant to give you false information as opposed to actually track who you're voting for. There's also sampling error. When they go to make a random sample, it should be truly random, that people in that population should all have an equal likelihood of being chosen. But we know that for many years, they only called people who had landline telephones. Well, clearly, in the last 40 years, cell phones have become more popular, and a lot of people don't have landlines anymore. So they switched to cell phones. But now cell phones tell them whether, it is a spam call, and a lot of people don't answer phone calls if it's from somebody that they don't know. So now pollsters have had to move to online or text messaging, where they send you a link for you to fill out the information. And of course, then we also know that sometimes people don't answer those things. So a lot of times there's over polling of people who are more likely to talk to pollsters or answer these types of questions, and under polling of people who do not answer phone calls or text messages. So sometimes they send out mass surveys in the mail. Other times they will do a focus group. So they'll bring in, 10 or 20 people and show them various advertisements, or show them various photographs of candidates who are running, or videos of them with various positions, and then ask them detailed questions about whether they liked or didn't like what they heard. These polls are used for all sorts of things. They inform the public about what's going on in government. So people who are already elected use polls in order to help them show the public what they're doing really well, or to explain why they decided to pass a law. If you are running for office and you are a candidate, it can also inform you as to what the constituents and voters really like and care about. And of all the things they care about, it can tell you which of the things are more likely to get them to vote for you. It also is a great way for the media to do projections. Now, this is where the media often does this incorrectly, but viewers of media want to know who's likely to win an election. In fact, in the United States, most media coverage of people who are running for office, particularly big offices like the president or senator, almost all of the stories are about whether that person is winning or losing, or if their poll numbers went up or down, as opposed to issues that they care about, the way they're going to pass laws, how they're going to pay for laws if they do get elected. There's very little news coverage of actual substance and issues. And of course, these can affect voter turnout. If the candidate that you like, you have seen a bunch of polls saying that they're definitely going to win, then you might not see the need to stand in line for 4 hours. And alternatively, if the candidate you like, you hear that they're definitely going to lose the election, then again, you might not turn out to vote. And in fact, we do see that voter turnout in swing states where it's really close is far higher than that of states where one particular party consistently wins. So there's lots of abuses by the media of these polls. The media is almost always covering what's referred to as the horse race. Horse racing is the covering of who's winning or losing, or whose numbers are going up and down. Almost all media coverage, particularly in national news media, is about the horse race and not about substance. It also allows candidates to just pander to the whims of the public in order to get elected. Just say what they think will get them elected, as opposed to really running on what they think is important for the city. And of course, early projections, when the news tries to predict who's going to win an election, it is often within the margin of error, but still wrong. If you have a really close election that's 51 to 49, but the plus or minus margin of error is 3%, well, somebody could be winning by a significant amount, or it could mean that the person they predicted to lose could win. So a lot of early projections discourage turnout. We saw this in issues in 2000 and 2016 and in 2020.